Hello and welcome. Well, the big top, the trapeze artists, the dancing elephants and the entire European parliamentary circus has now arrived safely back in Brussels. It has been quite a trip. It's only been 7 days since we last spent quality time with each other, but what a crazy 168 hours it has been, because in that time the Supreme Court has roared. Apparently Parliament was never prorogued. The monarch has been landed into the most almighty constitutional debacle. And of course the Prime Minister has been dragged home. So could things become even more confusing? Of course they can. It's BrexBox. Well, it's a whole fresh punnet of perfect MEPs that are joining me today. So Martin Daubney, Michael Heaver, Brian Monteith, and of course the one and only Ann Widdecombe. Wonderful. Wonderful to see you all.
Great to be here.
Well, shall we start with our first topic? I want to come to you first, Anne, and the Supreme Court ruling. And I think one of you, I think it was you, Martin, wrote that at the time of that ruling, there was a sort of collective thud of MEPs' jaws hitting the ground when it was actually ruled that the prorogation of Parliament was unlawful. What's your take? You're the, should I say, the most venerable politician amongst us.
I was one of those who was just gobsmacked by the ruling. I mean, after all, he'd been advised by his Attorney General, it had been seconded by the High Court, that what he was doing was perfectly lawful. And indeed, if you actually read the ruling, it's a bit surprising, because it says it was unnecessary, but to be unnecessary is not to be unlawful. So the long-term consequences are enormous, because it means that in future, any Prime Minister trying to prorogue Parliament is now in a very uncertain state as to whether he's got that power or not.
Yes, because of course this muddies the water, doesn't it, between Parliament, judiciary, and also our unwritten constitution.
Absolutely, and it is, of course, because we have an unwritten constitution. Everything's evolved through convention, including the Prime Minister's right to prorogue Parliament. Now, the Queen hasn't been dragged into anything because everybody knows that, you know, he advises the Queen, and the Queen is a constitutional monarch. She takes the advice of her Prime Minister. So it is Boris who is in the firing line. But I must say, I think we were all pretty amazed. Even the Remainers were saying, well, of course, you know, they will say that it wasn't unlawful, but it was nevertheless disgusting. You know, and of course they were wrong. They came back and said it's unlawful.
Well, Brian, I want to bring you in here, because when I was watching it, you know, Lady Hale delivered this, and I think we were all sitting there thinking, well, they're not going to find it in that way. And did you see she had the most magnificent brooch of a spider? And I think that should have been taken as a sign of things to come.
Well, Boris has certainly been caught in the spider's web,
hasn't he? Just yes. But do you think? You know, it was obviously unanimous, 11 of them. They all said it was unlawful. Did that raise any hackles for you? Did you think that this might not be quite right?
I think it'd be wrong to impugn the motives of the justiciary. I agree with Geoffrey Cox on that. But I do think it can be the case that you can disagree with the findings, and quite robustly, and I think we're entitled to argue about it. So I do actually think they're wrong. I've read many commentaries and articles. One doesn't have to be a lawyer to have an opinion. My opinion's as equal to anyone's in that respect. But I do think it wrong, because for me what it does is it moves the justiciary into an area where in future more and more questions will be asked about political background, about affiliations, and do we really want to go down the road of the American Supreme Court where there are hearings, where it effectively becomes party political and a contest for parties to put their judges in place? I think we really want to avoid that.
What do you think, Martin? Because I think the Supreme Court was set up in 2009 under Blair. What's your view on that and the decision reached yesterday?
Well, whether we like it or not, you know, the general public outside of Westminster are absolutely seeing this as a politically motivated decision.
Do you think so?
I think they are, and you know, we can say that it's not, and the judges, of course, are meant to be, you know, party neutral, but it was an 11-0 defeat for the government, you know, and that's even as a Scottish football fan, mate, that doesn't happen to you. And it came across terribly. And away from Westminster, this is being viewed by the general public. I was on radio this morning. It's being seen as an absolute meltdown of the entire establishment, which no longer represents the majority of the people. And I think we're heading towards perilous times. Now,
No, we're in them.
yeah,
We're in
dark times.
Yeah,
Michael.
I think Martin's absolutely right. I mean, the feeling that I've been getting when I've been on the streets of Essex, part of my patch, it's unbelievable, actually. The feeling is so strong now that in 2016 we voted for something. Not only are we being ignored, we're being actively overruled.
Yes.
By
Actively thwarted.
actively thwarted.
Yep.
By an establishment who, we voted for Brexit to change things, and instead it's almost like there's been a close of ranks.
Yes, very much so.
They closed ranks. Instead of listening to us and implementing our decision, it's gone completely the other way. You've got an establishment now that's sort of closed ranks, as I say, even more than before, and that, I think, is going to have huge electoral consequences.
So following on your argument, Anne, so this feels like the elite closing ranks, saying that it doesn't matter how you vote because we're actually going to overturn it one way or another. You've obviously been in politics a long time. You say we're in perilous times. In your lifetime of politics, how does this sort of stack up with other things that you've seen?
Oh, this is by far the worst because it is so chaotic.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been lots of controversies in my political lifetime, lots of them. But they haven't been, they've been as a result of clear decisions rather than as a result of chaos and muddle.
Yes.
And we all sit here, and the one thing that everybody's got in common, from the most experienced commentator right through to just, an ordinary member of the public tuning into it for the very first time, the one thing we've all got in common is we haven't a clue what's going to happen.
No, that's very true.
None of us have a clue.
But I think the one person, if you look, the character who I thought was enjoying this most of all was Burko, who Burko then said yesterday, of course, this is resumption now of Parliament. This is not recall because Parliament was never prorogued. I mean, he's playing the great sort of character.
But the one thing that the public want is for us to get Brexit done and then to get back to normal business. Normal business requires a Queen's speech to set out what the programme is.
Indeed.
We can't have a Queen's speech unless Parliament is prorogued. So this is going to be... It's already one of the longest Parliaments on record. It's the longest for several hundred years. It's going to break the record.
Yeah, I read it was actually the longest session of Parliament since the Civil War.
Yes.
And so given that the government has no majority, I think a minus 46, I think it's tally at the moment, he has no power. What does happen next?
Well,
I asked you that last night, didn't I?
You did, and as I said to you last night, Mystic Meg couldn't tell you.
Mr. Can.
There's a number of scenarios that could or could not happen. One is that there's a vote of no confidence, that he loses it, that they then try to form a government and they've got about 14 days to do it. That doesn't work, and there's a general election because there has to be, or there's a government of national unity, government of national unity led by Ken Clarke, which will make sure that we remain.
Yes. Michael, what do you think is going to happen?
I think, well, one thing's for sure, the Brexit Party is going to keep standing up for the 17.4 million. Of course, you've got a shrinking fringe, and we see a couple of them there in the background who just want to completely ignore democracy, pretend that the vote in 2016 never happened. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the polls, the Brexit Party are up 4 points in a matter of days, and if you look at support for no-deal Brexit, a clean break Brexit, we cannot have a situation. We cannot have a situation. The British people cannot be ignored. We cannot have a situation whereby we're sold a complete pup, and we end up in a situation where the EU still has control. This is about taking back control, and that, I think, is why you're seeing people's now rising up, supporting the Brexit Party, supporting a clean break.
You mentioned the Civil War.
I did.
I
wasn't there.
No, nor was I. The difference between where we are now and then is that we haven't taken up arms. This is an unarmed civil war.
So far,
but everything else is exactly the same. Families are divided, friendships have been lost, the nation's divided. Everybody is utterly divided on this issue, and it's becoming more and more emotional. And it is time. It is time to get a grip on this and deal with it. And yet we've got a parliament which says the people voted one way, we said we would respect that, but by the way, we're not going to.
No, we know better than you. What do you think, Brian?
There can be no government of national unity under Ken Clarke or any Remainer, because you would have a government that is against the people. The people have spoken, the government needs to deliver, and it's only once the government delivers on the referendum that we'll have any semblance of a chance of moving towards unity, because we'll be able to put it behind us.
Yeah, let me just ask you, Martin, Sherlock Holmes said, eliminate the impossible and whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. So what's going to happen?
What's going to happen is we don't know. I mean, at
Nothing's
dinner last
impossible.
night, we had a question and answer session with Anne. I said, right, Anne, you know the most, let's hear. And the conclusion was there could be one of 50 outcomes. And so here we are, going around in circles, but back to the general public and what they think. They're disgusted with politicians.
We need a general election.
They're disgusted with the House of Parliament. It's in gridlock, it's dead, they're zombies, they want change. And I think if a general election comes any time soon, I think we're in a great position. We're in a great position, I think, to take hold of this rising sentiment of rage against the system. And it's about changing the metrics of who sits in there. Because how can we get anything through when Parliament is against the electorate?
I just watched Parliament before I came here, and Geoffrey Cox is saying to the Labour Party, fine, call a general election.
Bring it on.
But they won't, because, of course, they know they will lose.
Precisely, especially across the Midlands, the North and Wales, they'll be obliterated. And today, the Labour Party just announced they plan to open the borders and end free, the controls on free movement. But add that to Brexit, you're talking about civil war. People are going to be furious about this.
Yes, Anne.
I was saying this is what happens when you try and let statute overturn convention. And the Fixed Terms Parliament Act is a very good example. It used to be within the Prime Minister's gift.
And this was brought in under the coalition, wasn't it?
And it was indeed. It was put in under a coalition, Cameron and Clegg, and they brought in fixed-term parliaments. And that now means that we can't have the sensible solution, which is a general election, because the requisite number of MPs, and it's not just a simple majority, the requisite
two-thirds, isn't it?
Two-thirds. The requisite number of MPs do not actually want a general election, so the public can just,
Michael.
And just going back to that point, David, what's going to happen? Brexit is going to happen, right? The genie is out of the bottle. It is going to happen. The question is... How long we have to wait, how many battles we have to fight. We shouldn't be having to fight continuous general elections. We shouldn't be having to contemplate another big vote on this, because we won it in 2016. We had the people's mandate, but it will happen. The question is how long these guys conduct a general election, everything else.
Well, we were, of course, criticised, those of us who campaigned and worked for Leave, that we would disrupt the country. We would turn everything upside down.
Wow.
And what we have seen is the Remainers go to any lengths to drag in the Queen, to drag in the Supreme Court, to drag in the High Court,
constitutional crisis,
to quote the Good Friday Agreement and say there'll be civil disruption on the borders and in Northern Ireland, to say that the country will split up. They will go to no length is beyond them to cause disruption and rip the country up, and that's what they accuse us of.
Are we at all worried that the Prime Minister will try to get a deal through in time, meaningful vote for?
Of course he will. That's his only hope. His only hope at the moment, because Geoffrey Cox has apparently said today that they're going to abide by the bend.
He has indeed.
So if he said that, then what that means is that if the Prime Minister doesn't get a deal at the summit, he has to apply for an extension. So his only hope, Boris's only hope, is to get a deal. And we know that deal is actually just a complete surrender. It's not a deal that's going to benefit us at all. It'll be Brexit in name only. Even if he gets all the tweaks that he seeks for the backstop, even if he gets no backstop at all, it's still a very, very bad deal.
And Michael, you're good on parliamentary maths. What's your view about MV4 going through? Do you think are there enough people like Stephen Kinnock who says, actually, I'm very nervous for my seat, and I would actually back the government in that case and go for Brino?
It's an interesting one. I mean, the rumours change all the time. Sometimes we hear that Downing Street think between 40 and 50 Labour MPs could vote for Theresa May's deal, but with Boris Johnson rebranding on it. We'll have to wait and see. What I will say is it will be so bad for the country, because the thing that will happen is that people will realise, if it does go through, that what do you mean we've still got the European Court of Justice still? What do you mean this is predicated on £39 billion, a single customs territory, the fact that you don't have full control in terms of state aid? What do you mean? That isn't the Brexit you voted for.
What do you mean the fishing?
Still
be plundered? What do you mean our forces could be sent to war without any accountability?
But I thought we'd left, they'll say. But I thought we'd already left.
This is why we have to be very clear and get that message across. It's about no voice, no vote, no veto, and saying this is not the deal we want.
But if it gets ushered through, and that's the grave fear, Look, people are so tired of this. They're so fatigued by the system, parliamentarians included. They just rubber stamp this to try and get on with the rest of their lives. And I think then the kickback will start. But how long will it take for the public to realise this? They've been betrayed. And I hate to use that word, but it's the truth.
Do you think we will get an extension? Do you think he'll ask for one?
He will if he doesn't get a deal.
And of course the EU can then decide how long that extension is.
The EU could decide to keep us there for a very long time indeed if they felt so inclined.
Well, they might like our money, mightn't they?
They might like our money, but they might like thwarting us even more.
And they might like a referendum.
They want to deter other countries from making an exit.
Of course they do.
Yes, they want to make an example.
And they will make our lives as difficult as possible.
And I think from the very, very start, those of us who were wise enough to that saw that come in. Why would they want to help us on the way out?
Well,
Surely they want to punish us because everybody else across Europe is watching and they want to see us nailed to the ground.
And I've said that before. We actually have friends here in the European Parliament, don't we? From many countries, actually, who are all thinking, well, we're watching what you're doing before we actually
step out. We're the first up the ladder, and the rest want to follow, and that's why they're going to punish us on the way out. It stands to reason.
Yeah, I want to move very quickly to our final story. The NCA clearing Arron Banks and leave EU after this referral by the EU Commission. This is your story.
Well, I mean, the establishment campaign that has been waged against Arron Banks relentlessly really does sum up how we're looking at people now trying to stop Brexit overall. It's the fact that this is a guy who got involved, who played a big part in helping the Leave vote win, and I think what's gone on with him is absolutely disgraceful, not just by politicians and what they've said, but also by actual parts of our media and journalists, and I think it's been absolutely disgraceful. I mean, there's been no heads of rolled at the Electoral Commission. From what I've seen, there's been no apologies. This is someone whose character and businesses and associates have been trashed, and the crime, back in Brexit.
And the timing of the announcement.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it was buried.
Buried because it was just before the Supreme Court announcement.
And there's a big worry for me here.
That's no mistake.
Aside from those shameful journalists, who I think should be independently pursued for damages, because they've libelled him. Aside from that, the biggest worry I have is what will any potential donor to a Leave campaign in the future think if this is the treatment that the conspiracy theorists and the media get? It in itself is part of the establishment's attempt to derail democracy.
That's why they get that treatment.
Yes.
It's to deter others.
Yeah.
OK, as a bit of light relief, Michael, when's the general election going to be? Quickly.
I think either November or if they delay it beyond that, it could be quite a long time.
Mystic Ann? Yes, Mystic.
February.
February? Why so?
Extension till the 31st of January. And finally, the public saying enough.
Yes. Good plan, Brian?
Mid-November.
November as well.
Should be Guy Fawkes Day, though.
And what about you, Martin?
I wish it was today. I really
so do
wish
I.
it
I
was
think
today.
we all do,
I would
don't
be
we?
hammering on doors in Ashfield, especially after what Labour said today. However, I think the turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas anytime soon. I think we may be trapped here longer than we think, guys.
Yes, I think you may be right.
No,
In
I
fact,
think that is
Geoffrey
right.
Cox said those very words in the House of Commons today, saying, of course, that at one point the turkeys will have to vote for Christmas because the general election will be coming.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. Sadly, that is all we have time for, and we only have 168 hours until we meet again. And you never know, we could have a new government, a new Prime Minister, or even a new EU deadline by then. Isn't it exciting? Until
But
then,
not a new
bye-bye.
Parliament.
Not a new Parliament.
Not a new Parliament.